with you. I get a lot of questions from people regarding gluten intolerance and celiac disease. So I kind of wanted to share my experience with you all and share with you what I know. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. Probably, I would say it was about, let me see, 12 years ago. I started to gain a lot of weight, and I noticed that I was starting to eat a lot, and you know, it really wasn't making like a whole lot of sense as to why why this was happening, right? But I was gaining weight, probably in the tune of about 100 pounds. Okay, and I was always very thin, didn't really have a weight problem. Maybe gained 5 pounds here, maybe 10 pounds, something like that, but nothing major like what was going on here. Then what started to happen was I was waking up every morning and kind of feeling hungover, like I just drank like 2 bottles of wine, didn't have anything to drink. So I was getting these strange headaches, very fatigued, and I didn't know what was going on. I go to the doctor. Oh, I was short of breath, and then they give me like this inhaler, and I'm like, something's wrong. Like something's happening, and something is really, really, really wrong. So that's kind of a little bit about the beginning of my story. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go over how why this may be happening, how our intestine is actually affected by the inflammation from gluten, the poor treatment available for celiac disease and gluten intolerance, and the steps needed to begin removing the gluten from your diet. So yeah, so back to, the shortness of breath. I was getting swollen ankles. I was feeling hungover. I had something called fat pants that I would call, because every day I could increase by like almost a size or 2 in pants because the difference in my weight. Then my daughter was getting pustules. She would get like almost like she was bit by a mosquito, but it would be like these like little pustules. I don't know how to describe it. It was almost like, like if you were to burn yourself and you kind of got a blister, it was like that. But they would ooze and all this stuff would happen to her, and she could not gain weight. She was so thin, she could not gain weight. She was just this really, 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 really skinny kid, right? So I'm going to tell you a little bit. Whoops, let me see here. I have some notes here. I want to explain to you a little bit about the wheat today versus the wheat our ancestors had, and how it's kind of evolved over the centuries, but it's actually drastically changed in the past 50 years. So there's something, triticum is the wheat of today. It's a product of breeding and greater yield. So it's unable to survive without human intervention and has a very complex DNA structure. That was not, this was not studied to see its effects on mankind. So wheat today is very small, and it only grows to about 1 foot tall and sometimes 2 feet tall. And the seeds are naked, which makes it easier to separate the edible part of the plant from the inedible part of the plant. This is yet another thing devised by man to increase the yield and the processing speed of wheat. Now, on the other hand, I want to go into a little bit more detail about that. So basically what was happening was the bugs and all these things were attacking the wheat, and they weren't able to keep up with the processing, right? So what they did was they started to crossbreed all these different grasses to make it more resistant to bugs and all that, and to increase that speed, right? So that they could yield more wheat. They can get more wheat out and make more money. But our ancestors harvested what's is called einkorn, and that grew wildly in the open plains. Einkorn grew very tall. That's where amber waves of grain came from. And the seeds were closed, and they had to be separated. So the yield was low due to susceptibility, to drought. And the wheat grew very, 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 very tall. Whole wheat today has a very high glycemic index, and it can actually increase blood sugar as much as table sugar or more. Okay, wheat today has addictive properties that can make you overeat, very complex DNA pattern. This change occurred because the farmers were wanting that higher yield. So scientists, when they crossbred the wheat and the grasses and wanted to make the plant resistant to drought and fungus and pathogens and all that, farmers are now producing 10 times more wheat than they were able to 100 years ago. But the einkorn wheat of our ancestors has more protein, and you don't get the spikes in sugar as high that you get, as high that you would get with traditional wheat today. But the DNA structure of the einkorn was simple. It did not have addictive qualities and was more easily processed by our bodies because einkorn grew in the wild plains. Let's see, so the percent of gluten content of the flours like whole wheat is actually 9.92% gluten. All-purpose flour is 9.2%. Unbleached bread is 8.74%. Cake is 6.7% gluten. Kamut, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, is at 1.62%. Einkorn is 1.21%, and barley, which is something that tends to bother people, is less than 1%. It's kind of crazy. Now, are there alternatives or safer forms? Yes, but for those people with celiac disease, einkorn I would not recommend even eating einkorn, but if somebody's gluten intolerant, einkorn is an alternative to them. The triticum monococcum, the einkorn, it lacks gliadin toxicity, but it's not, again, not safe for celiacs or highly sensitive gluten intolerant people. But it is something that should be looked at for everyone, right? Because what are we doing to our bodies? There's all this, I'm going to get into it. I'm not going to get ahead of myself. Foods can trigger the inflammation in your body, right? So foods that contain bacteria or a food allergen trigger an immune response and can actually escalate inflammation in your body. So refined grains like wheat, barley, white flour, corn, soy, etc. Why do you think that those things could trigger an immune response or inflammation in your body? Well, one thing that they have that is in common is a lot of these things have been genetically modified and crossbred and overgrown. So like with the wheat, they have done DNA tests, and like if they were to take the DNA from the grasses that they crossbred with, and then the wheat and all the DNA that these properties, these grasses and everything have, they actually found that there is other DNA that is there that they don't know where it came from. So it actually created other DNA. Now, what is this effect on our body? You know, this isn't how it was made. So it's kind of crazy. But another thing, refined sugar, corn syrups, cane sugar, agave syrup, all these refined sugars, again, are over-processed, right? So these things are over-processed. Artificial sweeteners like aspartame. Aspartame, I know, is known to be a carcinogen. Any type of commercially raised meats can also do this. Again, over-farming, right? But inflammation in the body can turn into serious medical conditions. Bad bacteria in the gut produces toxins that result in illness. Undigested proteins, that of wheat, that our body cannot break down like our ancestors' wheat, these proteins pass through the bloodstream, causing immune response to get wacky. And again, this is inflammation and the start of autoimmune disease. It can cause neurological issues. Wheat protein from GMO wheat is neurologically toxic. Our digestive systems cannot handle the complexity of today's wheat proteins. There are many more proteins involved with genetically modified wheat of today. This holds true for everyone, not just celiacs or those that are gluten intolerant, right? Think about everybody that has got all these digestive issues. You know, we hear about it all the time. You know, what is causing this? You know, we've got crossbred and genetically modified things and crossbreeding of these plants, and you're getting extra DNA from these things, and it's foreign. It's foreign to the body. How our bodies weren't meant to process this stuff, right? So how does wheat affect the intestines? So what happens is gluten destroys the villi in the small intestine. So the villi is flattened when someone has celiac disease and they suffer from malabsorption. So the malabsorption can cause weight loss, or in my case, weight gain. So what happened was my body stored everything I ate as fat because I wasn't absorbing the nutrients. My body thought I was starving, so it stored it all as fat. Our daughter was very underweight, so she was not absorbing her nutrients. So she would also get those pustules on the skin. So sometimes what happens is the toxins or the reactivity comes through the skin, because skin is your largest organ. But many doctors only see celiac in patients with weight loss and not overweight. So if you're overweight and you have celiac or gluten intolerance, a lot of times they only see that this could be a possibility in people that are skinny. So they didn't recognize that in me because I had gained weight. You know, they were just basically telling me to eat less, and that was not the case at all. Okay, so I get this all the time. Okay, I removed gluten from my diet and I didn't feel a difference. So let me also explain that unless you remove a food for at least 30 to 90 days and all forms of it, you will not know whether or not it affects you. And for some people, like celiac and everything, sometimes it can take 6 months. So wheat in general should be avoided by everyone because it is too heavily processed. But gluten can take months and months to clear from your body. So if I were you, I'd remove it for at least 90 days. If you feel better, some improvement. Sometimes you may feel worse from withdrawal. You may have more bloated days and skinny days until your system calms down. But the longer you were sickened, I guess, by the gluten, the longer it's going to take to heal. So I honestly suggest that everyone removes gluten and wheat from the diet. You can switch to einkorn as long as you are not gluten intolerant or a celiac sufferer. Genetically modified foods are not and have not been tested for long-term effects on human consumption, excuse me. So when you are changing the DNA of something, you are changing what our bodies recognize and how our bodies recognize it, right? So it also increases the proteins, and some of these proteins our bodies see as foreign invaders, and that's kind of when the autoimmune process starts. My doctor didn't recognize gluten as an issue, so kind of getting diagnosed with a celiac or a gluten intolerance can sometimes be a little tricky. I still, to this day, have doctors look at me and tell me I'm crazy, that there's no such thing as gluten intolerance or celiac, and it's made up. But sometimes I would like them to be me for the day and experience what happens to me after I've been gluten, right? The gluten sensitivity or celiac affects us all very differently. For me, it was headaches, hungover feeling, and achy everywhere, and weight gain. My daughter was achy, underweight, and would get pustules, blisters all over her body. And some people throw up and have memory issues. But again, we're all made differently, right? Now, you can get diagnosed by asking to be tested, but please keep in mind that these tests have given false negatives. You have to actively be eating gluten. Don't stop eating gluten if you feel you need to be tested. There's the IgA anti-gliadin antibodies, and these are found in about 80% of people with celiac disease. IgG anti-gliadin antibodies, IgA anti-endomysial antibodies. Then there's tissue transglutaminase antibodies. Don't hold me to how I'm saying these, but total IgA antibodies. If these come back positive, a GI doctor will usually order a biopsy. So when they do the biopsy, they actually go down, they take a sample from your small intestine to see about that cilia, excuse me, and see what's going on and see if you have that wearing, that flattened cilia, you know, because the cilia are like little things and it's what carries the nutrients back to you. Then there's also some DNA tests that you can do, and a lot of times these tests come back negative, and you still feel ill. You can order the DNA testing, and your doctor, if he or she will order, you can order it on your own. Also, it's called an HLA-DQ2 and an HLA-DQ8. The DNA testing is amazing, and this is actually how we found out about my husband. He was homozygous, meaning having one copy of each allele. He also has to maintain a gluten-free diet. But I'm going to email. What I can do is message me, and I can email you over the information to order your own DNA testing. It gives you a lot more information than just your celiac panel. It's amazing. Let's see what else here. What I wanted to talk about. If you think you may be sensitive to gluten, my suggestion is just remove it completely from your diet. Keep in mind that there can be cross-reactivity with foods. I can no longer really eat grains, period. I have to avoid soy, casein, dairy, corn. Corn is a huge one for me. Buckwheat, wheat, and gluten. And I also avoid sugar. This is imperative to healing. I can email you the list of things to avoid on a gluten-free diet. There's also studies done that undiagnosed celiac disease can lead into many autoimmune disorders. MS, lupus, brain dysfunction, intestinal issues. You can wind up with an ostomy bag or a colostomy bag. This happened to my grandmother and my great-grandmother. Autoimmune conditions can later turn into cancers due to an overwhelming amount of inflammation in the body. So you're going to ask me, like a lot of times people ask me, how do I get started, right? So what do you do to get started? Stop eating wheat and gluten products is imperative. Gluten is hidden in many types of food that are processed. First step is just stick to a strict meat, veggie, fruit diet. Make sure your spices are gluten-free. A lot of companies use like anti-caking ingredients to keep spices from sticking together. Do your research, okay? You are your own best advocate. But just because gluten is not listed on the label does not mean it's gluten-free. Like people actually sometimes feel like they can just like look at a package and say, okay, it doesn't say gluten. Gluten is not actually an ingredient. It's a protein. So just because it says gluten-free, sometimes they are not 100% gluten-free, because this whole gluten-free thing has turned into people doing it for healthy reasons, right? But then there's some people that actually get sick from gluten. So, excuse me, so it still may be below a certain ppm, and I believe it's like below 10 ppm, and I don't know, every manufacturer may be different. So just keep in mind that just because it says it's gluten-free does not mean that it's 0 ppms and it's parts per million of gluten. The first 90 days, stick to strictly meat, veggies, and fruit that you cook. Don't go out to restaurants for the first 90 days, just in case. You want to clear your body, right? The things that, this kind of brings me to my next point. If you have celiac or are gluten intolerant, please note that there is gluten in all products, from hair care, toothpaste, soaps, mouthwash, etc. Skin is our largest organ, so anything we are applying to our skin and hair, we are absorbing into our bloodstream. There are plenty of gluten-free shampoos and toothpaste, and you can usually just go on the manufacturer's website and they'll tell you. This may seem all overwhelming and against kind of that normal way of life, right? But I'm seriously here to tell you it's okay, and this needs to become the normal way of life, because wheat is genetically modified and our bodies cannot break down these new proteins from the wheat. So there's plenty of gluten-free restaurants, but please stress to them that you are very sensitive and it makes you sick. They take care to ensure your safety. I suggest avoiding restaurants for the first 90 days because you are still learning and mistakes happen, and happen at restaurants, right? Mistakes are made. We're all human. And you want to be certain that you are 100% gluten-free for at least those 90 days. And don't eat anything processed. Avoid it for 90 days. You won't miss it. So I've been gluten-free now, what did I say? Let's see, 12 years. And I don't regret it one bit. The more I learn, the less I wish I could have a slice of pizza or a donut, right? These foods are poisoning us and our kids, and you're doing yourself and your children a favor by removing this toxic food from your diet and your lifestyle. I'm going to email you a list of ingredients that contain gluten. Just message me and I can get this out to you. A list of nutritional qualities of the grains. And I can add you to my blog where I'm adding gluten-free recipes and making your own household and personal care products. And I also teach classes finding safe alternatives, not just gluten-free options, but free of harmful chemicals and things that are neurotoxic. I know it's hard to fathom that a food we grew up with and that this is in everything, in every aisle in the store, and that everything in the store, right, when you're walking around, that the things in the store could possibly be bad for us. But the reality is that these corporations are for profit and they're constantly marketing to us, right? Look in the grocery store, when you go in a grocery store, look at all the kids' cereals. Where are they? They're all on that lower shelf where the kids can reach and go, mommy, 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 daddy, 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 can I have that? Can I have that? Can I have that? Why? Because they know you're shopping. Yes, 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 put it in the cart, right? So we need to get the pharmaceutical companies and these big corporations out of every decision made about our healthcare, food, and livelihoods. So I just want to thank you today. I definitely want to share this information. I get a lot of messages about it, and I kind of wanted to educate you all and empower you because you are your own best advocate and you know your body. So these are some things that you can do to figure out what's going on, and you can kind of go from there. But thank you so much. And definitely check out on my YouTube channel the other shows I've done. I've brought on other experts through things that my family and I have learned. We've brought in people that, whether it's financial, stress management, branding yourself, building wealth, all sorts of things. Because my blog, I didn't say this, but I found out about the gluten. I didn't even know what gluten was when I found out about it. And I found it out from someone's blog. So it's really become my passion to share information and help other people, because if it wasn't for her sharing her journey, I may still not feel well. So, yeah, so have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing you again.